Welcome to my review of Double Dragon for the NES. Now this is a game that I have a lot of nostalgia for, but I'm going to try not to let that, make me too biased in my review. I try to kind of cut that out of the review and try to rate it, more as a game, you know what I mean? The quality of the gameplay and things of that nature. But I got this game when I was quite young. And it was disappointing, of course, that it was a very far port from the arcade version. It really is very little like the arcade. But it was its own unique game. And it did retain parts of the art style of the arcade game and, of course, the soundtrack. So that was really, really nice. But it was a very different game. But the game did grow on me, and I actually liked it quite a bit. It wasn't one of my favorites, but I have a lot of nostalgia for it. And of course you can do glitchy shit like this, walking up the walls and shit. But it is a game that I liked. But as far as a I'm going to rate it as a game as far as the quality of the gameplay and things like that. There's not a lot of enemy variety. The hit detection itself is not bad. It's pretty good, but the problem is when you do your punches, you have a very short range punch, which is kind of shitty. But the kick kind of makes up for that. You have good range with the kick, but one of the big issues, it doesn't follow the rules of most, good beat-em-ups where, once you land the first hit, you can kind of mash your way until the enemy falls to the ground, right? But in this, the enemies constantly break out of those combos, and you're often trading punches, which is kind of just gives it a low-quality feel for a beat-em-up. Now, the original Double Dragon 4 Arcade had the same issue. It wasn't a perfect game by any means. You can also glitch out bosses and shit like you see me doing here. He comes out and then you just kind of walk down a few ladders and you beat the stage. Now, of course, these bosses become regular enemies during the course of the game, so it's not that big of a deal. But see, now he's just a regular enemy and you have to fight multiple of them in the stage, and they just become normal enemies. But one issue was that, when you are hitting the guys, you kind of just get hit for no reason. You'll be kicking a guy, and then at random times, they'll hit you and damage you. And the original game was like this, too, for arcade, which was a shitty feature of that game as well. But it was an early beat-em-up, so it can be forgiven for that reason. But it would still factor into the quality of the game. I even was kind of harsh on the arcade game, which is what, I really like that game a lot, but it has a lot of issues. So I gave it kind of a harsh review. But same with this. This is even worse than the arcade version, even though it tries to add more content. So, it does have that kind of issue with combos getting interrupted at random times, which makes it unpredictable. You only get 3 lives and no continues, I believe it is. So you do get a few checkpoints in the stages if you do lose a life. But it's not like the arcade game where if you die, you respawn exactly where you died. Usually you're sent back a little bit to wherever the checkpoint was. Sometimes you can be sent back quite far. But there's only 4 stages, like the arcade game, but they have a lot of little areas and things that the arcade version didn't have, such as these caves. Another weakness of the game is the platforming has very shitty control. If you get a little bit too far on the edge, your character kind of just opens his mouth and drops straight down, and you'll fall into a pit or whatever's below you. So, there is some shittiness with that. You have to be kind of on the center of the platform. You do get used to it, but the platforming control is pretty shitty by any kind of platforming standards. It's really the kind of thing that probably shouldn't have been in a beat-em-up game. It doesn't really need to have any kind of platforming with awkward controls. The second game suffered from this even more. They kind of doubled down on that. Though the second game is much, much better game than this. So you're going to be fighting a lot of the same enemies again and again. It's going to be a continuous thing. But one cool thing about this game, you see this is the final stage now. There's some cheap traps in the beginning, just like in the arcade. Though they don't kill you as easily. But they damage you a lot, and they seem pretty random. They're kind of hard to dodge. It's usually luck for me. But, the one cool thing about this game, the one thing I like about it, that wasn't in the arcade version, you can consider it a pretty cool feature, is that there's an XP system basically leveling up. So, as you earn points by striking enemies, you earn these hearts at the bottom of your life meter. The more hearts you earn, the more different types of moves you unlock, depending on how many hearts you have unlocked. So by the end of the game, your character gets quite a bit more powerful, and by the time you earn the elbow, you can really decimate a lot of the enemies, which you'll see in the final boss gauntlet, which I show. But so that's a cool feature, definitely. But soundtrack, there's only a few tracks, but it's top notch. They're very memorable little tunes. But as far as the core gameplay and everything, it's really not too strong. Though I do like the game, it's really the gameplay is nothing special. And it can be kind of cheap. It's more about learning how to exploit certain aspects of the game, than good gameplay. But I definitely wouldn't say that, purely on its merits as a game that it's a bad game. But, at the same time, it wouldn't be anything great either. So there's a few parts like this where there's some platforming. Another annoyance is that there's some maze-like bullshit where if you pick the wrong door, you get sent back pretty far. So there's shit like that, which is also, I think, is always shitty game design. It's never something that I was into, this trial and error memorization of doors. There's not that many doors to memorize, but still, the first time you get there, you're probably going to get sent back. So now, by this point, I have the elbow. This is the final boss room. So you see I have the elbow, and it kills these guys in one hit. It's extremely powerful. It's even more powerful than it was in the original arcade game. Which, when I did my 1cc run, which is no continues used of the arcade version, it was pretty much all elbows. That's the way to really exploit that game. It's not quite as effective in this game, but it works very well. So for these Abobos, now you can kill them in 4 hits instead of taking super long. Another thing is because the game is as cheap as it is with your combos getting broken all the time, a lot of times you're going to want to rely on jump kicks early on and keep jump kicking the guys. And for the Abobos, for these guys, you might be jump kicking them like 10 or 20 times before they die each. So it just becomes very tedious because if you want to try to fight them on their own level with regular attacks, a lot of times you get comboed and your health bar gets stripped. You do have a few different weapons like bats, knives, dynamite, boxes, barrels, and things like that. But they're not super useful. The projectiles like the knife are good though, whenever you can get them. The downside is that if you get hit by a knife or dynamite, you lose massive amount of health. So you always want to take those guys out first. And I will drop a link to my tutorial in this, and the tutorial will cover, that'll cover all the strats I used. This game took me around an hour and 14 minutes to beat this time, but I was using save states this time to make my own checkpoints, so I can't really go by that. And I don't have a time on when I originally beat the game. I'm sure it took several hours, but I don't have the original time. It was a very long time ago. But yeah, now this is the machine gun boss, which can basically strip tons of health if you stand still for too long. You'll get machine gunned, and it'll strip a massive amount of health. So for this guy, you're basically just moving up and down and trying to get your hits in. It's not really a great boss fight, but I mean, it's serviceable. It feels a little cheap. This guy will break out of your combos constantly, so I just ended up spamming the elbow. And though I did take a lot of damage, it did end up working. But yeah, I mean, the game, it doesn't have a ton of variety, like I said. It's got issues with your combos being broken constantly. It really breaks the rules of what most good beat-em-ups do. So, the gameplay is really nothing to stand out. Now, it's a hell of a lot better than some of the other ports of Double Dragon, like on Atari 2600 and Master System and a lot of other systems. But, as a game, I wouldn't rate it too highly. I would probably give the game a 6, maybe even a 5.5. For me, a 6 is like a decent game. And I think it's probably at least decent, but it could even be a little bit lower than that because it's kind of janky. So, I mean, there's not much to it. So it could be either just above mediocre or decent, depending on your tolerance for this kind of thing. But, of course, for me, if I was just rating on how much I like the game, it'd be higher because I just kind of like it for nostalgia purposes. But if this was a game that just came out, and it was trying to compete with NES games of that time period for this style of game, it wouldn't be rated too high by me because it really, it's not anything that's going to stand out. Now, the game does have a versus mode as well. It's a pretty shitty versus mode, but I used to play it a lot with my friend, because, you just play whatever the fuck you have, and it was fun to fuck around. But it's a pretty shitty versus fighting game that's built in as a two-player mode. Now, this game does offer 2 players, but it's the kind where you have to take turns. After you die, your friend will get a chance to play until he dies. So it's not a real 2-player mode. So, yeah, not a hell of a lot that this game offers, even though I did enjoy it. It did have a lot of limitations and issues. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.